Hello YouTube. Before we get into the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, bell-shaped icon, hit the thumbs up, and comment down below. Alright, so you guys are probably wanting an update on the last video. Last video was about to go into a 2-day long divorce court trial and more importantly, child custody battle. I say more importantly, not because children are more important than spouses, it's because I don't believe that. I know that that's the popular view in America, and you know that I could give two craps about what America thinks is popular. I have a biblical worldview. According to the Bible, it's God, then your husband or your wife, then your children. And the reason for that is that the whole purpose of children in the Bible, of having children, is to rear them up on how to be a good husband and wife by looking at your example, your spouse and your example to each other, and then to send them out to become a wife or a husband. So they're never designed to be a permanent fixture in your life as far as day-to-day living. They're always going to be your children, but biblically speaking, they're meant to go out and get their own life. And you and your spouse, on the other hand, are meant to be one, to become one till death. So it's not that children are unimportant in the Bible. They're very, very important. I would say they're the most important type of evangelism that you can do besides the analogy of marriage in the Bible. It's just that the spouse, the wife or the husband, is more important in the Bible because you're with them for life. So your relationship with them is priority number one outside of your relationship to God. But this video is about divorce, marriage licenses, and I differentiate between marriage licenses and marriage itself. When I say marriage licenses, I'm not talking about a biblical marriage license. I'm talking about the state contract that they that they masquerade as a marriage license. And it's about what can a young man, an unmarried man, a man that's never been married, or a man that has been married and been taken through the ringer in divorce court. I'm not saying that's what happened to me. It could have went worse, could have went better. But this video is about what can a young man that's either not been married before or that has been married before or that's married now can learn from other men's experiences in divorce court. So the first thing I want to say is that marriage is a beautiful thing. Marriage can be made into a very, very ugly thing by very, very ugly people. I once was a very, very ugly person, morally. My wife was once and still is a very ugly person morally. But when we both met, neither one of us was marriage material. I was not husband material. I did not deserve to be anyone's husband when I met my wife. And she was not wife material and did not deserve to be anybody's wife when I met her. What we had for each other was what the world, what America calls love, was what America calls love, being in love. Being in love and love are not the same, but America, and especially women, conflate the two. Being in love is something that can happen at any moment and you have not much control over. Most people have no control over it. I have control over it. I can control whether it happens to me or not. Most people think that they can't. Most people think they can't control their emotions. But being in love, either way, is an emotion that you typically fall into or fall out of. Almost all women, and even a lot of feminized, feminine men, they were raised by single mothers or raised by a bunch of female teachers and principals and just a feminine society in general. A lot of even men believe in this feminine idea of romantic love being the be-all, end-all. There's nothing wrong with having romantic love. You should not marry someone based off of romantic love alone. There are people who have married throughout world history with no romantic love and stayed happily married without it. There are people who married with no romantic love and developed it very quickly or over time, but did not base their marriage off of that, rather off of their vows, and were happily married married a long time. Then there are people who marry for romantic love, and they always get divorced. It doesn't matter what people tell you, just look at the statistics. They always get divorced. It's usually under or right at the 10-year mark, and then sometimes they can even be at the 30-year mark or the 40-year mark. But people who marry based off of primarily or solely romantic love will never last, never have lasted, or never gonna last. Marriages that last are marriages that are based off the understanding that we are making vows, keep our word, and because we're humans, we are both going to screw up on parts of those vows temporarily. Both going to disappoint one another. We're going to both do horrible things to one another from time to time, just because that's realistically likely going to happen with two human beings that aren't perfect. But no matter what, your marriage is always and forever. That's what a marriage is supposed to be based off of. That's what real love is. Real love is like what a parent has for a child. There's nothing that my children can do to make me fall out of parental love with them. There's nothing that my children did to make me fall into parental love with them. They were born, I loved them. I chose to. I never stopped choosing to. I'm never going to stop choosing to. Not any one of them. I have 4 children. Nothing any one of them can do will make me not love them. Nothing any one of them can do can make me say, I think we should see other families, I think you should go find some other parents. I'll go find me some other kids. This isn't working out. That doesn't happen with parents typically and children typically, because parents and children don't have a confused misunderstanding of what love for one another is, even in this disturbed country morally, but husbands and wives do. So basically, if two people who are not biblically defined husband material or wife material get married, one of them or both of them are bound to divorce one another through the state. And I put the quotation marks there because the Bible says over and over and over and over and over in the New Testament that there is no divorcing. There's one scenario, one exemption in the entire New Testament that says that specifically a husband specifically can divorce his wife, not vice versa, and only specifically for one reason and one reason alone. And not anybody, most people don't like that. And it doesn't matter what most people like. It's what it says. It's what Jesus said. It's what God said. Jesus is God. It's what the apostles said over and over. It is what it is. Let me turn on airplane mode because I keep getting calls and texts. I don't want that interrupting this video. Okay, there we go. So, it doesn't matter what people want. That's what the Bible says about divorce. There is no divorce, legitimately speaking, except from the husband filed on the wife. He presents her with a certificate of divorce and sends her away, and that is only for the cause of fornication, whoredom, sexual immorality, being committed by the wife against the husband, not vice versa. But even in that one exemption that people try to take and say, well, this applies to women and men, this is for husbands and wives, saying that they can divorce each other. It doesn't. It's very, very clear in English and definitely in Greek that is a gender-specific allowance. But even in that allowance, even with men being allowed to do it, it's only for one reason. And even if that legitimately happened, in that circumstance, Jesus still very clearly stated Moses allowed that exemption because men were heartless. But it was not allowed from the beginning by God, by Jesus, and that God joins a husband and wife together. When a man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, that means holds on to and never lets go his wife, and those two become one flesh, and then they are no longer two, but one flesh, like this finger, and that therefore what God has joined together as one, like this one finger, no human can separate. No human means no judge, means no jury, means no lawyer, means no wife, means no husband can separate. You can split this finger in two with an axe, but it would never be two fingers. It would be a dead, broken, cut in half, worthless finger, worth nothing to no one. That's what Jesus is saying happens when you try to divorce your spouse, even if you're a husband in a legitimate scenario to do so. It's just what Jesus said. Now, if you're not a husband, if you're a wife, or if you are a husband, but you're trying to divorce your spouse for some reason other than that one specific exemption, then you're nothing but an adulterer according to God, according to Jesus. If you divorce your wife for any reason other than that one, or if you divorce your husband at all, it says it's not even divorce, it's just separation, which God forbid for a wife to do. It specifically said that even if you're an unbeliever and your spouse becomes a believer and you don't want to live with them, you're not to separate from your husband for any reason, and a husband is not to divorce his wife for any reason. It says that if the wife separates from the husband, he can live at peace with the matter. But it doesn't say they're divorced. And it says that a wife cannot separate from her husband for any reason. And even if she does disobey that law of God and separates from her husband, she must remain alone or be reconciled back with her husband if and when he'll have her. Until her husband dies, then she's free to remarry, but only if it's to a Christian, and only under those circumstances. So anything outside of that very, very thin, narrow statement that I just made, according to the Bible, is adultery, period. So me and my wife married in 2010. I was 22, I believe. She was 21, I believe. It was 10 years ago. She just finally finished the closing of the filing of a divorce on me. So what that means is basically nothing. That's the funny part. Biblically speaking, it means nothing. She's just in as much rebellion right now as she was before she did that. She's just as much an adulteress in any relationship she's been having or will have in the future until I die, according to the Bible. I did not put her away or divorce her or willingly participate in any of that, so I am free to remarry as long as I would be willing to reconcile back with my wife when she repents, which would then be one of the many biblical cases of polygyny scenarios in the Bible, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I don't care about culture, I care about Bible. But yeah, me and my wife, we were not neither one of us marriage material. She was a horrible person, I was a horrible person, and we loved each other for it, and we hated each other for it. It was one of those emotional roller coaster things that you watch on TV and love so much to watch that is not healthy and is toxic. And then somewhere down the line, I became a Christian. She did terrible things to me. I did terrible things to her before I was a Christian, and I became a Christian. And then it was she did terrible things to me. I apologized to her for terrible things I'd done in the past. She did more terrible things to me. I apologized for more terrible things I already apologized for in the past. And it just continued on and on until what Corinthians says would happen, that if you become a believer and you obey God's law and do the things that you're supposed to do regarding your marriage, and the other spouse doesn't become a believer, then they will eventually depart. And if they remain so, they will, they'll get what all people that disobey any of God's laws do on Judgment Day. But as long as you do what your half of the commandments tell you to do, you're good to go if you're a believer, which is what I've done. But yeah, I mean, my wife was no more of a terrible wife than I was a terrible husband, just in very different ways. We were just very, very different kinds of terrible spouses. And she had a child when we married, child by another man. And I raised that girl as my own flesh and blood, to the point my own flesh and blood, my 3 biologicals, were jealous of her quite a bit for the 12-ish years of her life that she lived with me. And then we had 3 of our own biological children. Those are the only ones I'm allowed and able to see now, because I can't force anything with a non-biological child in this country, even if I raised her longer and was closer to her. That's just the way it is here. So what can be learned from divorce? What can be learned from marriage and divorce? when you're talking about through the state license or when you're talking about in general. In general, no marriage has ever or will ever truly succeed unless it's started and or eventually put on the foundation of both spouses and all biblical laws regarding marriage being believed and followed by both spouses. If one spouse starts to, unless the other one ends up repenting and also starts to and becomes a Christian, it won't work out sustainably for very long. But unlike with what the state claims with their licenses, their paperwork and their divorce documents, it means nothing more to God or to reality than crap covered toilet paper at all. So a state license divorce means nothing. All of the bad things that you could possibly imagine happening in a marriage and then divorce happening means nothing. God can and has fixed any manner of thing before in the past, and he will again with many people. And some people he won't. Some people will never repent, and they'll get what comes to all people who don't repent and obey God on Judgment Day, if that's the case. But so what can be learned from that is, if you're going to get married, you build that foundation on God and his word and on all of the marriage laws that apply, and you learn those before you get married, and you be sure that you're willing to accept and obey them. What can be married from the state marriage licenses for a man? For a woman, a state marriage license is a wonderful idea if she's a sociopath that seeks to destroy a man eventually and has ill intentions, or thinks it's even remotely possible that she might ever want to do something like that. For a man, the only thing that could be learned from a state marriage license is don't do it. Don't let anybody lie to you and tell you that you're required by God to do it. From the entirety of the entire 66 books of the Bible, Genesis to Revelations, there's not one single man, not even one, that got a marriage license from Egypt or Rome or Babylon or Persia or any pagan government, or even, let alone even from God's government, even from the theocracy of Israel. There were no marriage licenses issued or revoked by the government. That was a private matter. You asked a woman's father for her permission to marry her if her father was alive. He gave it to you or not. If he gave it to you, you said vows, you had sex, you were married. That's it. If her father was dead, then you just married her. You said vows, had sex, were married. You didn't need any permission from anybody. There was no going to the government for a permission slip to marry in the Bible. There's no command to do so, and there's definitely no command to do so for divorce. Nor would they have granted such a license of divorce to a woman by her request in the Bible. It just didn't happen. The government has no authority over marriage, never did, never will. They can enforce whatever they want to. They can pretend and say that they have whatever authority they like, but I'm talking about in reality. I mean, the government can say that they strike into law that the sky is dark purple day and night, 24/7 in all parts of the world, and it wouldn't become fact by any stretch of the imagination, other than that they just redefine the word dark purple's definition or something. But it would mean nothing, and that's what a divorce license means from the government. Marriage vows, even through the government, mean something only because you're doing marriage vows, and it's not because the government is signing off on them or giving you permission. It's because you did the parts that God considers valid, irrespective of the parts you did that are meaningless. But divorce licenses through the government mean nothing because there's no such power given by government in the Bible, and the exact opposite is stated by Jesus, that what God has joined together, no man can separate. No human being, judge, jury, wife, lawyer, you just can't. So when someone divorces someone else, when a woman divorces anyone for any reason, it's invalid. When a man divorces a woman for any reason other than whoredom, fornication by the woman, it's invalid. And even if he does so for that reason, that one exemption reason, then it can be valid, but it's not what God tells him to actually do. He says not to do it. What God's joined together, no man can separate. It says that it is valid when he does it, not morally valid, but like it holds. It happened in reality. It just shouldn't have. But if it happened for any other reason than whoredom by the wife and filed from anyone but the husband for that reason, then it's not valid. meaningless entirely. So what a man can learn from other men regarding marriage licenses through the state is do not ever get one. It's just a death sentence. It's a contract stating that your wife does not have to hold up her end of the deal, which would be sex, cooking, cleaning, parenting your children, homeschooling, submitting to you. She doesn't have to hold up her end of it according to that contract. And whether she does or doesn't, you will be forced to hold up your end of it, which is providing food, providing water, providing shelter, providing monetarily. They will see to it that that the government will see to it that the man sticks to his side of the deal for the woman, and they will encourage the woman not to stick to her side of the deal, and will actually give her incentives not to. Because why would people are evil, not just women, people in general, men, women. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you give somebody the amount of power they need to get everything they want, everything God said that they may have, but with none of the things God says they must do to get it, they will abuse that. And almost anybody would. It's almost impossible not to. And so because of that, you should never, ever, ever get a state marriage license. I'm not saying you should never get married. People confuse what I'm saying when I say this all the time. Getting married has nothing to do with the government. Don't get a marriage license. You don't need to ask the government for a permission slip to marry a woman any more than you need to ask the government for a permission slip to take a dump, to eat a meal, to breathe in oxygen. Didn't ask for permission for that because God just says I can do that. If God says I can do it, I don't need to ask the government for a license or registration or permission to breathe. And I don't need license or registration or permission to urinate or poop or eat or exist. And I sure as hell don't need it to get married to a woman, and you don't either. Now, the government will try to shame you into doing that. Pastors will try to shame you into doing that. Feminists, non-biblical pastors will try to shame you into that. Your parents, your siblings, your friends might try to shame you into doing that. A woman that you love and want to marry might even try to shame you into doing that. And you tell every single one of them to accept your decision on how you will marry that you got from the Bible, or to go straight to hell. Because that's where everybody that doesn't accept God's ways goes. You say, listen, I don't care what you think about it. You do things your way, and I'm going to keep doing things God's way. Because God doesn't say anything about a marriage license from the government in the Bible. Romans 13 does not say that. No verse that sounds similar to Romans 13 says that. That's not what they say or mean. Romans 13 does not say if Hitler commands you to burn Jews, you must burn them. Romans 13 does not say if the government tells you to do something and it's not strictly forbidden by God, then you must do it. You can do something if the government tells you to do it and it's not strictly forbidden by God. It does not say you have to. What Romans 13 says is what it says, that God instituted government to be his ministers to enforce his laws, not their made-up laws, not any arbitrary laws they make up. Objective laws of God, given very clearly in both testaments of the Bible. God made government to enforce those, to enforce what he calls good, and to enforce punishment on what he calls evil. And it says in Romans 13 that if you are doing the enforcing of the encouragement of evil and the punishment of good, that's not a governing authority, biblically speaking. And if you are enforcing good and punishing evil, then that is a governing authority. Good by God's standard and evil by God's standard, not by George Bush's standard or Barack Obama's or Donald Trump's or Bill Clinton's. God's. Not by our ever-changing human standard of morality. God's. So if a government is doing anything in the realm of marriage, or any other realm, but specifically in this video in the realm of marriage, that God calls evil and is rewarding what God calls evil and punishing what God calls good, then you should not get a marriage license through them and are not required to, and actually would be encouraged by the Bible not to, because it's a sin to do anything that's against God's natural order. And if you sign a document that's a contract stating pretty much my wife is going to be my feminist matriarch and that she has my balls in a vice, if I don't do exactly what she says, she can take all of my property, all of my children, and all my money and my residual income for the rest of my life through alimony, child support, property theft, and it all be legalized, That's the government enforcing feminism, which is the first sin in the Bible that led us all here, is Eve's sin of feminism, by rebelling against her father God and against her husband Adam. So you're signing a contract stating that you have to adhere to that type of feminism. That's a sin. And I'm not saying that if you did that out of ignorance that you're unforgivable, or that there's, I'm not saying that. Pretty much every man in America has sinned in many ways because of our improper upbringing, and pretty much every woman in America has sinned in many ways because of her ignorance to God's law and improper upbringing, both men and women. So if you're already married through a marriage license, I would say close that thing out. Get what the government calls a divorce, but stay married to your wife. Do not put her away or send her away, but get rid of that license before she gets rid of it for you in an ugly, nasty way. I would say if you're not married to the government and you plan on getting married, get married. As long as your wife is wife material by biblical standards, and as long as your husband material by biblical standards, and as long as you've read every verse in the Bible on the topic and you both are with it, that's great. Don't get a license though. Do not get a marriage license. Don't do it. There's no benefit in it for you as a man to do that. You say, oh, I can get a tax break or something, man. I don't care if they give you $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 over the span of your 100-year life in tax breaks for marriage, because they will take hundreds of thousands, if not millions, from you in divorce if your wife so seeks it. Especially if you become any man of any kind of high value and make any sort of money, you will get taken to the ringers. You'll get financially, emotionally, proprietarily, and parentally raped in ways you cannot even imagine. And I'm not saying that's what happened to me. Me and my wife worked out an agreement with ours, allegedly. So far, we'll see what happens. I don't ever hold my breath about what women say or what words they give until it happens. But anymore, I used to, not anymore. But we came to the best agreement I could come up with. It's not biblical on her end, but it's not unbiblical on my end to agree to it in the situation that I'm in. It was just the best, wisest decision I could make for my kids, even for my wife, that whether she hates me or not, I love her. I don't really care how she feels about me. So it was just, I came up with the best thing I could come up with for her well-being, until or unless she repents and does something that's actually right. For my kids' well-being, until or unless she repents and does something that's actually right, and for my well-being. I came up with the best thing that seemed even remotely possibly likely that she would agree to. But that's very rare. It's not going to happen 9 times out of 10, and you should just never sign that license. You just shouldn't do it if you're a man. And any woman that has a problem with that, you tell her to kick rocks, because she's got some ill intent for you in her heart. If you explain to her why you don't want to sign a contract signing over your parental rights, your property rights, your monetary rights, so that a woman can break her end of the bargain of marriage but still make you keep yours, and you explain that to her and she still wants to do it, then guess why she would want that. Spoiler alert. So yeah, don't do it, bro. Just don't do it. Don't sign a marriage license. Get married through God's law, through God's methods and ways, not through the pagan, not through the heathen. Don't get married under Lucifer's system, okay? It's just not going to work out well for you. It's designed not to. So that's what you can learn as a man from other men who've gone before you about marriage, is that don't get married unless you're a biblically qualified person to be a husband, which I wasn't when I got married. Unless she's a biblically qualified person to be a wife, which in my case my wife also wasn't. Unless both of you are willing to submit to and know and are willing to submit to all of God's word on marriage, all of God's laws and rules on marriage, and are willing to stick to that. And unless she's willing to do it the biblical way, not the cultural way, and that you don't sign any marriage license at all. And even then, the way this government is set up so anti-male, you need to get a cohabitation agreement signed that says that they can't hit you with a common law marriage claim, that they can't just say, well, y'all aren't married, but you lived together so long you still owe her half your property. You need to get a cohabitation agreement that's like basically a prenup for someone who's not married through the state. And you need to get her to sign that if you're even going to let her live with you as your wife in this country anymore. And even then, if you have kids, and that's one of the main purposes of marriage in the Bible, the way these laws are set up, she's gonna control you, man. So if you have kids and she leaves you, she might not be able to get half your property. She might not be able to get half your alimony, but she'll get your child support, and she'll own your butt through those kids, because all she has to do is blackmail you using them, and there's not much you can do about it. I'm not saying don't have kids. I would say it if it wasn't just, it's just absurdly unbiblical to say specifically go out of your way to get married and don't have kids, because that's part of the commands of marriage, is be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, according to God. But I will say that there are smarter ways to have kids in 2020, if you live in America, than anything anybody else is doing. And I'll talk to you about that in future videos, maybe. I want to get into it right now, but for right now, don't get a marriage license and get a cohabitation agreement, period. Marry a godly woman. Make sure you're a godly man. Make sure you're of high value. Make sure she's of high value, all biblically speaking. And make sure y'all are willing to and know and are able to follow God's laws on the matter, on marriage. Until then, work on yourself. Become the godliest, most intelligent, most healthy, most high value man that you're capable of being with who you are. Be on your path and purpose. Start yourself a business. Get yourself some land. Learn to do a no-till back to Eden garden and grow your own fruits and vegetables for yourself first, then after you're married, for your wife and kids. Just become an all-around high value man. Get residual income. I recommend getting residual income before you get married. That's like owning a rental property, owning several rental properties or something like that, where you're making monthly income without working, passive income, money that's coming into you while you sleep. If you break your leg, if you get COVID-19 and can't work for a month, just whatever happens to you, you still got money coming in, because your money's working for you, you're not working for your money. That's what residual income means. That's what you want to get before you get married, if you want to be the best kind of husband that you can be. I was a stupid, foolish man when I got married and didn't know or care anything about anything like that, and just watched too many TV shows and too much Corey and Topanga on Boy Meets World and stuff like that. Get residual income, then get married. Become a high value man. You won't have to worry about women or chase after women. Just focus on you, and then women will too.